Hello, my name is Nathan, also known as the Journeyman Philosopher, and today I'd like to do a video following up a bit from my last video, which was all about energy and the reality of how the energy that we use interacts with the world, with ourselves, with each other. So if you haven't watched that video already, I would recommend that you do before you watch this one, because some of what I'm about to say might not make too much sense if you haven't seen that one first. So I've mentioned before in previous videos that one of my great inspirations was Franklin Roosevelt, 32nd US president. He was president through arguably one of the roughest periods of American history, first through the Great Depression and then obviously through World War II. And there's a few of his quotes, some of the things that he said over the course of his presidency that I feel really encapsulate some of what I've been talking about with this, the way that energy works. He was a bit of a master at encouraging people to feel a certain way, to encourage people to feel a way that would actually, usually to be supportive for them, and in doing so allow them to actually influence the world around them. So I'll give you an example. The first one is arguably his most famous quote from his inauguration speech in 1933. Now, when he came to power, when he became president, obviously the US was in the midst of the Great Depression. There was not a lot of hope to be had. A lot of people were feeling very, very disheartened. Massive unemployment rates. Nobody had any money. It was all a pretty depressing time. And so in that first speech, he was trying to give people hope. He was working to really encourage the common person. And so what he said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. And so what he was really saying there is that people's own fear was becoming a limitation. And that you can see that through both social, economic, all sorts of different ways that you can look at that. But ultimately it was just boiled down to fear is something that paralyzes. As he said, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror that paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. Fear is a very paralyzing force. It is a type of energy, as everything is. Everything that we think and feel is a type of energy. So fear is a type of energy that is very constraining, very restrictive. And there was a lot of fear around at that time, and quite rightly so. A lot of people were starving, a lot of people didn't have jobs, had no income coming in. Even the ones that did have an income didn't have enough to look after themselves and their family. So on some level, that fear that people were feeling at the time was very understandable. But at the same time, what he understood, what FDR understood, is that same fear was absolutely paralyzing any attempts to recover from those situations. And this is something that, you'll see a lot of economic experts talking about. They talk about, when you start to see market downturns, when people start to get nervous about spending money. So people start to save more, they start to, they turn inward, they become a lot more conservative with what it is that they're doing in the world. There's less money moving around, and of course that means that there's less money for everybody because, there's just less money moving around. People are less willing to invest in new businesses or, take risks. That's the fear that he was talking about. That's what he was really referring to. And that becomes a very tangible force. And this is something that you can see throughout history. It's certainly not unique to this specific circumstance, but there's been many cases throughout history where fear has led to ruin for whether that was for individuals, for organisations, for whole nations, that paralysing, repressive energy, which is almost very contagious. The more people you start to have with that sort of attitude, the more the people around them begin to become affected and start to propagate that same attitude, and before you know it, it's spread throughout everyone. So this is the energies working behind the scenes, influencing each other. The more people are feeling a particular way, the more people are going to feel that way, and it becomes a bit of a snowball effect. So the purpose behind that speech was he was attempting to reset in some ways. He was attempting to bring hope that there was a new leader and things would be different from here on out. So he was attempting to short circuit some of that fear that had gathered over the time of the previous president, where nobody really believed that there was a way out of the darkness. And of course, while people believed there was no way out of the darkness, there was no way out. It's as simple as that. If you believe something strongly enough, you will create that outcome. And so this was an attempt on a national scale to redirect that, to instill that little bit of hope, to make people believe that there was a solution, potentially, and not without hard work, not without a lot of blood, sweat and tears along the way, but there was a way out. And of course he successfully created that. He made people feel hope again, and of course they ended up coming out of the they came out of the depression. And you could point to lots of policy changes and all sorts of things that could potentially be a piece of that, but I really feel that the genesis of that whole process was that day in 1933 when he gave this speech and gave people hope again, changed people's attitude so that they believed that it could change. So the second quote that I wanted to talk about is probably one of his lesser known quotes. And it wasn't really a quote at all, not properly. This is something that he actually only wrote about half an hour before he died in Georgia. He was writing a speech. I forget exactly what the speech was going to be for, but he was writing out a speech. And one of the last things that he wrote in that speech before he actually died is, "The only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. Let us move forward with strong and active faith." And I think in some ways that quote sums up both FDR as a man and the way that he wanted to be remembered and the way that he wanted to bring himself to the world. He had an indomitable will. And he didn't really have it in him to doubt himself. So, as an example of this, FDR obviously was inflicted with polio when he was in his late 30s and never walked again. Ended up in a wheelchair for the second half of his life. So right through his presidency and his term as governor of New York and a whole bunch of really sort of big offices that he held, he was in a wheelchair for that whole time. And there was a fair bit of chicanery in order to give the appearance that he wasn't a cripple, because at that time anybody who was physically disabled was fairly looked down on. They were seen as being pretty useless and that's it, you're just a drain on society now, you can't be anything useful. So to get to the office of president in that state was quite an achievement in and of itself, and really does speak to an iron will that he had. But he had a set of leg braces, which was a steel contraption which bolted on to his legs on both sides. And basically they were designed to allow him to stand. So he could stand behind a lectern, for example, and give a speech. And you'll often see footage of him standing, leaning on a desk or something, standing behind it. because he couldn't actually really stand by himself, so he had to have something to brace on. And these leg braces, which were pretty horrendous, really, not at all like modern prosthetics or anything like that. They were, they would have been incredibly uncomfortable, I would imagine. They allowed him to stand, and to some extent, with help, they allowed him to walk, in that he could kind of shuffle forwards. He could sort of move his hips and shuffle his legs forwards. So with someone to hold on to, he could at least give the illusion of being more mobile than he was. And one of the things that he determined to do after he was inflicted with polio was he was determined to walk down the driveway at his family home at Hyde Park in New York, upstate New York, which from memory is about a quarter of a mile. So it's not a short distance. It's not particularly long for anybody able-bodied. It's only, 350, 400 metres, something like that. But he was determined, even though the only way that he could actually walk at all was with these leg braces, literally locking his legs straight, and then he could, kind of shuffle forward and balance on them. He was determined that one day he would walk from the house to the bottom of the driveway. Now, to my knowledge, he never actually made it. But every day that he stayed at that house, which was quite a bit of his time, he made the attempt. He would get up early and he would put the leg braces on and have someone assist him to put the leg braces on because he couldn't do it himself. And he would attempt to walk down the driveway. And sometimes he got pretty far. The furthest I know of, he got more than halfway before he ran out of energy. He just couldn't keep doing it anymore because it would have been intensely unpleasant for him to do so and very hard on the body. But the will that he showed to keep doing that, even when he kept failing time and time and time again, this, I believe, is the essence of that quote. The only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. Again, this is talking about energy, and it's talking about the way that our own energy can affect us and can limit us. So where we are bringing doubt to the world, we are creating limitations on ourselves. If we do not believe that we can do something, we cannot do it. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that if we do believe we can do something, we can do it. Just because I believe that I can, run at 100 miles an hour or jump 20 feet in the air, doesn't mean I can do those things. Those are physical limits. So belief doesn't break the laws of physics and just, allow you to do whatever you want. But within reason, it does allow you to do whatever you want because it allows you to create whatever version of yourself you want. Our own self-talk, what I like to call either the inner critic or the inner coach, really goes a long way towards either limiting what we can accomplish or allowing what we can accomplish. So the inner critic is where we talk to ourselves in a very negative way. Like, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, you're not good enough for that. All of those sorts of narratives that can run, which are really about keeping ourselves small. They're about limiting ourselves. And the energy of that does actually create our reality. If that's the energy that we're putting out into the world, oh, we're not good enough, we can't do it, of course that's what we're going to get back. We're never going to be able to accomplish anything amazing if we're constantly telling ourselves that we can't. And vice versa, the inner coach, which is all about, it's not about being unrealistic and inflating our egos or, making us out to be, amazing and better than we really are, but it's just about being realistic. Oh yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can learn how to do that. I might not have the skills to do it now, but I can learn. There's no real limitation to what is actually possible other than, as I said, the physical limits of the world. But anything within those rules is possible. It might not be possible right this very moment, but we can create that. If it's something I don't know how to do yet, well, I can go and learn. If it's something I don't have the capacity for, well, if I want to go and run a marathon, I can learn how to do that. I can get myself fit. I can train myself. Unless there's a very good reason why you can't. Again, can't break the laws of physics if you've got a club foot or, something like that. Some physical limitation that stops you from doing it, Well, you can't overcome that just with belief. That's a physical limit as far as your capability will go. But other than those sort of very hard limits that the world places on us, anything within that is possible. But only if we believe it's possible. If we allow ourselves to buy into doubt, if we allow ourselves to believe ourselves to be less than we really are, then we're placing our own limits on what we're capable of accomplishing and what we're actually able to get to as far as how we can develop as human beings and what we can become, what version of ourselves we can be. And that's where the second part of this quote comes in. Let us move forward with strong and active faith. He wasn't talking about faith in God, faith in a religion, anything like that. He was talking about faith in ourselves. Let us move forward with strong and active faith in us, in our ability to create the reality that we want to create, in our ability to do whatever we want to do, whatever we need to do, to be whoever or whatever we need or want to be. That was really what he was talking about. The only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. Exactly true. Whatever we doubt in ourselves today places a hard limit on what we can accomplish tomorrow. And that's just how energy works. That's just how the world works. That's how we work as individuals, as people. Whatever we believe about ourselves, within reason, will become true. So that's all from me for today. Hopefully there was something useful in all of that. I will expand on some of these ideas a little bit more in future videos. But for now, take care and goodbye.